Thank you, Imo. Welcome everybody. I'm Charles Weir. I'm a researcher at Lancaster University and the Security Lancaster Institute, and I am here to talk to you about developer security essentials. Can everybody see that slide? I'll take it that's a yes. So, thank you all very much for making the time to come into this presentation. It's good to see so many people here, and thank you for coming. I'm presenting about developer security essentials, which is the rather improbable outcome of 5 years of research into what helps software developers improve their software security. And the fundamental story of this is simple. Workshops fix software security. That sounds rather improbable. When I started research, I thought it was tools, training, and secure development processes that would fix software security. In this presentation, I'll discuss how we came up with such a surprising conclusion. I'll first of all introduce my background, then discuss the known techniques that already help a lot of software development teams with their security. And then we'll move on to the first problem, finding ways to help development teams to adopt those techniques. And one solution we found. And then we'll discuss the big problem, how to get such solutions actually used in the outside world and what we're doing about that. But first, I've got a kind of hands up question for you all. Please could you go to the link in the chat box?
Which is
there? There's a menti.com link in the chat box, or simply enter in your web browser menti.com and the number 9905201. Is that, do we have it in the chat?
Almost.
Great. There we are. Brilliant. Thank you, Imo. And, whoops, sorry, go back and go across.
Ah.
Great. You can continue adding, but actually that's a remarkably encouraging result. A lot of people I normally work with say very important, but that vital is more than I'd expected, and it suggests a world in which the things we're talking about are really important. So moving back to our slides, I promised I would introduce myself and the researchers. So here's something about where I'm coming from. I started my work life as a programmer at Reuters, where I had nearly 10 years of working at various financially based software projects. So I've got a background as a grunt programmer, or designer and all sorts of other things. And then I spent another 10 years as a consultant, learning by doing and teaching. software architecture, object-oriented design, and agile software development in a variety of different roles. And I also wrote a patterns book with my colleague James Noble in New Zealand, describing how to design, actually with small memory systems. And I then realized that I'd spent a long time telling other people what to do. So I moved on to following my own advice. And I ran a company called Penrillion with nearly up to 30 people at a time for nearly 15 years. We did software for mobile phones, which was an exciting leading edge area. And in about 2013, the most leading edge thing about that was mobile money. And we had the task of building the first Android mobile money app for Everything Everywhere, the telecoms company. That was a baptism of fire to software security. I discovered there was very little support for software developers, plenty of low-level stuff like use this function and not that one, but nothing that would help a team lead of a major project to be sure that they weren't doing something that someone would sue them for. And actually, that was me. So 5 years ago, I joined Lancaster University to research the problem. I started with 2 years of just finding out what the experts had to say. I interviewed over 20 different specialists and analyzed all the resulting hours of discussion. That is just as dull as it sounds. The analysis, not the interviews. But it's very rewarding because you can be really sure at the end of it that what you are seeing represents some sort of reasonably objective truth. And here's what we found. The main thing we found was that the model of the security world at the time was quite simple. It was that developers were a sort of foot troops of the security world, and their job was to go out and do exactly as they were told in terms of security. And therefore, the job of the intervener, who would usually be a security expert, would be to instruct the developers what to do, choose their tools, and basically the developers would do that because it was the right thing to do. And I'd been exposed to that model as a developer, and I was quite surprised to find that the specialists I was talking to who were successful found it as unpleasant as I did. That's not really the way life works. Instead, the actual way that successful interveners, if you like, people helping developers do better, were working, was that they were in some way showing the developers what was important, why it was they needed to do security, and providing them the tools to do with it. And then the developers were the people who are active in this whole thing. They were the people making the decisions, and they were the people choosing whether or not to incorporate tools. So, in fact, although the experts talked about a lot of different techniques, almost all of them I found were pretty well known already. Things like standardization about security, on-the-job training, threat assessment, well known, there's good books on the subject. Configuration review, which is a bit of a jargon term, but what it's really talking about is getting your components right and making sure you haven't messed up the way your systems are set up. No surprises for getting automated static analysis is going to be important, nor penetration testing, nor code review. And there was an odd one that was sort of mentioned, which I've called product negotiation, which is you can't just do security on your own. You've got to involve the stakeholders in order to find out what's going on and what is required. So those techniques pretty well known. So if that wasn't the problem, what is? But before we come to that, I'd like to know to what extent the problem is here too. So I'm going to ask you another question. What techniques are you using? So if we go back to Menti and get the next one, move on to the next one, which I hope will happen when I do this. Yes, we have got what security techniques, I see there's a missing S, do you use on your current project? And so where in the middle is, I don't know what you're talking about. And on the left-hand side is, I don't know what you're talking about. And on the right-hand side is, yes, I've been doing this for years and all my projects are like that. Can you do that? Way. That's, I think, 7 or 8, perhaps. That's really interesting. Not what I would have. So we've got quite a few of us for whom security is vital. So the penetration testing, that makes some kind of sense, because that's usually the sort of the customer's approach to saying, okay, security is vital, so I must do pen testing. And I'm interested that threat assessments aren't being done. So, that's kind of not unusual, but I think it might be something to learn. Code review tools are a mixed blessing. Libraries with known security problems, though, are not. So tools to check for security problems are one of the simplest ways of dealing with this. Code reviews are painful. So, I mean, I've done a lot, but they're not easy to set up in an organization. So I'm unsurprised that's only about half of us. So that's an interesting view of this community. Thank you. So then moving on, what it seemed was that people knew about what was done and what was needed, but they didn't somehow get there. So the industry knew, but individuals didn't necessarily get there. And if you can think of this as the sort of race to get to security, the first thing that was missing sometimes was the insight as to how you get there. The second, unsurprisingly, was the support to do it. And that's not just somebody saying you must do thing X, but also the time to fix problems and the money to pay for things like penetration testing that no one would expect a developer to use. So there are many frustrated developers out there expected to do security without that time and support. So in the rest of this presentation, we'll explore how we can get that to happen. And the way it's almost stumbled upon, the approaches we've done is we get developers to play a game. This is it's a kind of card game, though you can play it online with virtual cards. And it has all the developers being project managers, product managers, and deciding which security attributes, which security features they put in a product. Then at the end of each round, as it were, bad things happen, and they find out if the security features they've put in have kept them safe into the next round. And the great thing about it is that it emphasizes this security being something that anyone can understand. The second thing is that a problem that I've seen and we found in this was that many teams are not at least uniformly aware of what it was that they were defending against, what the security problems were likely to be. So one of the first groups I worked with, excellent group of people, lovely team, as good a set of agile developers as I've encountered. And they knew quite a lot about security, and they were defending their product carefully against attacks by people in North Korea. And then after a bit of thinking through the whole doing this security assessment, this threat assessment, they realized that actually their real problem was one customer seeing data that they weren't supposed to. That would have been a real security problem, whereas an attack by somebody in North Korea would probably not have worried them very much. And finally, from the other thing that some of the teams we worked with found, in fact, almost all of them found, was that they would say, yeah, well, we've worked out all these things that need doing, but we can't figure out how to get the time to do it. So the third workshop we do is to figure out how to present the solutions to the security problems they've found as things that a product manager or whoever's organizing their time might say, oh yeah, I'd like one of those. I'd like my customers not to see, I'd like to be able to tell the customers, yes, we made it absolutely impossible for the wrong person to see this data. Absolutely guaranteed. This is a thing we have checked on, whatever it might be. And the surprising thing was that developers were able to do that. I'd expected it to be something I'd have to do a lot of teaching, but no, they were able to do it. So visualizing this, here's an example of they're actually students playing the app security game, which proves my point that almost anybody can. Thank you. And then this is from an online giving of the same thing. That we then do. We work out the security threats that you might find. What are all the bad things that might happen? We write them up on post-it notes, and then group them all together like that. And then those dots, the red and black dots, show where people have voted. Red is voted that things are that they would be a particularly evil thing to happen, one of the top 3 evil things, or the top 3 most likely things to happen. And the reason why those dots appear to be in odd places is because when a thing gets dots by it, it gets put on a separate risk impact board where the things with the most dots go in the top right-hand corner. And so we've got the red dots down one side and the black dots across the other side. So we've got here 5 terrible things that might happen that are both reasonably likely and something we would like to avoid. So we take those 5 and we figure out ways of selling the solutions to those. We have to work out some idea what the solution is to product management. So here was an example. People more likely to work with us, our investors might be happier, might improve the company value. There are lots of different possibilities here. Indeed, my favorite is we could sell our customers gold, silver, or bronze security. And that really explains to a customer in one phrase just what it is that we're talking about and why they might want to pay more for a better, for security fixes. But we're academics. That's all very well. In my consultancy days, I would have just gone out and done that, and that's fine. But actually, I would have always been thinking, I wonder if it's really any good. And so as academics, we have to say, how are we going to prove that this works? And the way we've come up with in this, and we've been doing this now for nearly 2 years, is we interview the people involved both before and 3 months after, or a sample of the people involved, both before and 3 months after the workshops. And we don't ask explicitly what they're doing. We don't say, are you doing this technique? But we ask around all of the security things they do, and then deduce from that in what's called coding. And this is not software coding, this is thematic analysis, as it's called. So we transcribe the interviews and, as it were, highlight phrases that mean, for example, that they're using one thing or another. And we then turn that into numbers. So, for example, in the coding, we might say, we ask the sorts of questions that I just asked you and showed you on the spider diagram. So we deduce from it how much people are using penetration testing. Have they not heard of it at all, perhaps? Or are they using it regularly on every single project they work on? Those are 2 ends of a scale, and we've got about 5 steps on that scale. And we've also got for each of the techniques, there's about 12 different techniques we've identified that would suggest someone's doing it well. And we then turn that into numbers. And that means we can then do infographics like this. So this represents about a year's worth of doing this with 8 different organizations along the top, labeled D to K. A, B, and C were the previous year, and 12 different assurance techniques of one sort or another. That's things that developers might be doing for security. The size of the bubbles indicate how good they were at the end of 3 months. And the color of the bubbles indicates how big a step up that was from when they started. So a yellow bubble it's a step, a single step, as it were. A red bubble it's 2 steps. They have gone from perhaps not knowing about it at all to perhaps using it. And as you see, because the workshops were concentrating on threat assessment, security assessment, and on product and on the negotiation with the customer, those do reassuringly show significant improvements in almost all of the companies. The companies varied enormously from one single developer, small company doing good work in mapping, to that in there somewhere there is a government department doing a top secret database project. There's also J is a well-known retail company, and who, as you see, were the ones who didn't find any improvements, though I believe individual developers did find some help. And you can see the rest at a glance. So, being developers, of course, we play around with the figures and we ask ourselves questions like, is this most useful with companies that are going from a low start or from a high start? And the answer seems to be low start. Well, that's not really a surprise. But what did surprise me was that having a product manager present actually in the workshops didn't seem to make very much difference to the success of improving negotiations with a product manager. But it did improve quite a lot else. And another thing was that having the manager as the lead facilitator seemed to be a good idea. Security people were not, both as this says and from watching them at it, they weren't really very good at this kind of facilitation. It's not a thing that security people are taught how to do. So there's some thoughts. But then now we know that we've got some techniques that work. These workshops, they help developers to adopt these new techniques. How are we going to do the next thing, the big question, which is to get the techniques known in the outside world? And I feel I will give a plug here to two very good people, Emma and Robin, who are running a project to help cyber people do startups. Now that's not actually exactly what I'm doing, but they have been, the whole business of how you do marketing for a small company turns out to be exactly what you need to get this kind of issue, this kind of technique out to a wider world. So even though in many forms we're actually giving it away free, even free things, need promotion, they need marketing, you can't get away without. And indeed, it is publicly available. Contact us if you want to use it, and we will shortly be producing the whole materials online for those who wish to use it. There is a website, securedevelopment.org, and with a description of this and everything else. And we have an online version in beta. So there's someone playing the game and a group of people in a workshop. Right. Thank you very much for listening. This is an exciting topic and it's great to see so much interest. I'm now going to suggest we pause the video. Yeah. And this would be interactive, and this is where you get to contribute yourself. In a moment, Imo will put you all into randomly selected groups. Please be sure to unmute yourself, because you will be muted, and to switch your video on if at all possible, because you'll be in groups before and it's difficult to switch to talk to a blank screen. You'll have 15 minutes to discuss as a group around this topic. I've put up some questions. We will share a link on the chat. Is that? There we are, that bit.ly BCS 27 October. If you're paranoid about bit.ly, you might have installed the thing that will tell you that it's actually a Google Doc. But trust me, it's fine. There's no problem with it. And it will bring you up a Google Doc, which I suggest we use as a whiteboard for the discussions. And when we can all use it. I've put a couple of the slides just as a reminder, and also some questions to discuss. When you're in your groups, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourselves briefly and then turn to the questions on your own slide. We'll probably only have 3 or 4 breakout rooms, in fact. And if you could make notes on the slide of any interesting observations. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pause the recording at this point, and we may come back to record the conclusions once the workshops are over, once the breakout rooms are over. We're going to break out until about 7:30, and I'll give a sort of 3-minute warning when it's about to end. So that's coming up right now.
Okay, well, I just had a fascinating talk, and I see there've been some very interesting points coming in here. Would somebody from Breakout Room 3 like to present at all?
Yes, if come straight to myself.
Okay, Imo.
Good.
Hello. I give you Imo to discuss what has happened.
I'm going to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hang on. This one. So I hope everyone can now see that. Hang on. There we go. Can you see my second screen, which contains the Breakout Room 3 page?
Yes.
Okay, we had a very interesting chat from Marina in Switzerland, who works for an insurance company, and she found it very difficult for her team to persuade the chief executive officer that it was worth expending money on security until they had a serious breach, followed by a second serious breach, which cost them a lot of time and money. At that point, he started taking it more seriously. It's probably not the recommended way to persuade people because it's expensive. Chris Hunt pointed out that he works in an educational context, and there's a particular problem, which is that you've got a class of students, some of whom are very clever at exploiting security loopholes, and others who are perhaps less hot on these things, and you have to open up certain APIs and privileges in order to let students make progress. And there will be some that make inappropriate use of that privilege. So the example was, for example, that they put some cross-site scripting in there, which would pop up loads of windows. So each time you closed one, 10 more would open in a browser. And finally, my own experience has been that if you can get as far as actually conducting a security review of an architecture, that opens up lots of opportunities to tighten it up. And people, once they've become involved in that process of identifying where are the important assets and how do we protect them and what are the threats, they'll start contributing lots of ideas and actually owning that problem and being interested in doing it. So I think I'd like to hand over at this point to
yes. And oh, I'm
so I've got to stop sharing, haven't I?
Thank you, Emma. That's fascinating. Has Breakout Room 6 got a representative here who might like to?
I can do that as I wrote it.
Hello. Okay. Thank you.
So can I share? Yes, I can. Where is it? Is it? Yeah, it is.
Yes, I can see that. That's great.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there were 3 of us, and I mean, we saw really a common theme that we basically thought, as Chris had said, that developers really need to take ownership and they need to be trained. and that way, they'll be thinking about security from the beginning. You need to get things done early on. I think we all talked about problems with security just being sort of put on at the end, and that really not working very well, and certainly not leading to a good platform for future development. So yeah, particularly if you've got more junior people, you need to make sure that they're trained up so that they're capable of throwing their weight around, to put it, exaggerate a bit, and yeah, should end up with a better product to be more efficient. That was really our conversation. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Now I need to stop sharing, which is a bit, yeah. Where's the controls gone? Oh, there, right.
Yes, I think that bit about the testing was probably backed up by what people were saying they were doing, wasn't it? That there was a lot of pen testing and not always the other.
Yeah.
You know, much better than not doing anything at all, but possibly not as cost effective as thinking it out in future. Oh, you've been adding. Would you go like to breakout room 1?
Yeah. Yes. Let me share some of the thoughts. Hi. So we've discussed with Charles on several topics, and what I liked and wanted to mention is that probably the security awareness workshops are a nice way in a direction to empower developers to make better security decisions. I believe I saw this in the other breakout rooms in a similar fashion. Start with there and basically training or start building skills, going into security reviews and targeting situation where we think about security by design, doing security decisions up front as much as we can. And the security sales mentioned that this probably is a good thing that should be discussed as maybe part of the team skill set. By team, I mean the development team or the teams involved in delivering of the software, in order to raise awareness towards product owners or towards decision makers. And it's better to generate security backlog coming from the team instead of waiting for some security issues that are coming from the client or from the product side. Probably this will be too late at that point.
Thank you. That sounds great. And have any of the other groups got any points to add? I don't see anything written, but we've got a little bit of time. Then I will briefly conclude and say thank you very much. The workshops or similar workshops, Open University have done some have done workshops as well of a different sort that are also quite effective. Seem to be a way of kind of getting this business of the pull. So as we were saying in breakout room 1, the having the developers pull the security by design seems to work really well. Can I say thank you very much for attending? This has been educational for me as well, and I hope it's been educational for you. And if you wish to take this further, please get in touch with me. And thank you very much to Imo, Jim and Chris for running this all.
Charles, thank you very much to you. That's Jim.
Indeed. Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks Chris. Thanks Charles. I mean, did you actually put in for one? Because I wanted to award you a BCS book as a token of our appreciation.
I have received a BCS book. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Can you tell us which title it was?
Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Not offhand, sorry. But no doubt I will find it in a moment.
Super.
My
Thank you
book
very much.
backlog is about yay high.
Yes. So I wish everyone a very good evening and a secure tomorrow.